I want to talk a little bit about the future. I want to talk about as we start to think and sense our way beyond this crisis, how do we make sense of a future for which there is no textbook, for which there is no accurate prediction? There are many predictions out there, but we have to ask ourselves, is there one that is clear to us, that gives us a really credible way forward, that tells us what needs to be done next, what tomorrow's decision will be like? And in our view, there isn't. So the question is, how do we make sense of a future which does not exist yet, which we don't have a crystal ball for? I'm going to start with you, Amy. Let's start off with, I know it's a question that gets asked in much of our work together. One of the first questions that get asked is, if we don't have a crystal ball, what do we have? So I'm gonna start with you. Any thoughts around this?
Lots. I think this is a trick question. One of futurists, so I'm a futurist, favorite questions to ask people when they're starting a project around which they'd like to innovate or optimize what they're doing is to ask, what would you do if you were building your organization or your project or your public-private partnership? How would you do it today? Which is to say, could you imagine that there were no precedent? What if you were unburdened by precedent, by bureaucracy, by processes, by cultures, by the idea that this is the way we do it around here and there is no other way? What if you could? So the answer to the question, how do we make sense of a future for which there is no precedent, is that there never actually is, to some degree, right? Uncertainty always exists. I don't want to minimize the fact that, right, some versions of uncertainty are more extreme than others, and there's a lot right now. But in the context of this conversation, the answer is we should always be making sense of the future for which there's no precedent.
Exactly. And I must say, in our work together, I often find that that is probably one of the first and often troubling realizations for management teams, to come to terms with the fact that there isn't, that the prediction of whether it's the world of work or the future of the office or the future of the industry or what the energy transition would look like, as just one industry example, does not really exist. It may be in some glossy publications or have credible names against it, but in fact, when you start to think of the future in a different way, using a different lens, you'll come to your own conclusion, and it may be very different to what you started off with. So if I had to ask you then to try to apply that line of thinking to today's crisis, would you say that everything has changed, that there is a new normal for which there is no precedent, or perhaps we could look at this differently? How would you tackle that?
Well, look, the first answer I gave was very much an extreme. Of course, we have trends. Of course, there is a degree of high probability in some areas of our lives. Small areas like our family lives, or large ones like demographic trends. So one answer is no, everything hasn't changed. Look around, we can each look around our own rooms and our own lives and our own organizations and actually realize that much has not changed. The second answer is a little less technical, and I do think that it responds to now. The severity and the speed of what has been required for all of us in different countries to address the public health crisis has meant a cascade of changes which are producing subsequent cascades of changes. So whether those are making existing inequalities more visible, or bringing certain businesses to the brink of bankruptcy, or producing new opportunities which will emerge, like, yes, much has changed, but that is because of a cascade of events, not because of one.
Okay. It does bring to light one aspect of looking at the future, and that's the timelines in which we look into the future. We've spoken on many occasions around the kind of the short term, the immediate, the severity of the short term impact that this crisis has had and still has on many of us. When we start to think into the future, we think about longer transitions. We think about the impact of trends over a longer period of time. Perhaps let's talk a little bit about how does that feature in our understanding of the future, and whether in trying perhaps to answer that question, has everything really truly changed?
Well, I think a way to frame thinking about the future and the present and the near term is to think about the future as always unfolding, right? So people think that we're working with a futurist, we're thinking about the future, it must be out there. The problem with out there is we don't have to deal with it yet. It's somewhere else for somebody else's problem. So another way to think about time in the future is that, what we really want to do is look deeply into the present and holistically sort of draw back. So see far into the past and far into the future and take a longer view of what's happening, as opposed to thinking about the future as starting at some point, which conveniently is, after we're responsible for it.